Story 1. One thing I deeply regret is that my strong-voiced late father never once gave me a hug or a kiss or said any such thing. I have rectified this with my two beautiful boys. Story 2. My mom and dad were big on expressing love, compassion, and how proud they were of us. I never wondered how they felt about me. They always showed and told me. Story 3. Every day I miss it. My dad had a very violent, abusive father, and my dad was the complete opposite. Bear hugs and I love you daily, if not more than that. I had two different friends come live with us for years because their home life was terrible, and my dad couldn't stand seeing that kind of abuse happen to anyone else. When their parents came knocking, my dad put his full 6'6" size and 300 pounds of muscle on display and say, "Nope, they are staying here. He died when I was 19, and I miss him all the time." Story 4. No, I haven't spoken to the person in over 25 years. One of the last conversations we had was him telling me, incredibly casually, that he considered his second wife's young son to be his second chance to get the son he actually wanted, and that he couldn't afford to mess it up. I mean, he didn't even say it out of anger. He said it matter-of-factly like he was telling me what time it was. Story 5. I have a 4-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. I make it a point to tell those little boogers I love them all the time. If something ever happened to them or me, God forbid, I don't want them to wonder for a second where I stood with them. People say if you say it too much, it will lose its meaning, but I disagree. If you never water a plant, surely it will respond drastically once it's watered. But wouldn't it grow better if it was watered and properly tended all the time? I know it's not a perfect analogy because you can overwater plants, but it's the best I've got on the fly. Story 6. My dad is not really the type to say, "I love you" often, but he shows it in small ways, like making sure I have everything I need or just being there when I need advice. Sometimes actions speak louder than words, and I think he has always been that way. It is not the words that matter. It is the consistency of the support and care over time. Story 7. My dad was a hard ass, a Korean War veteran, and we didn't get along most of the time. He said, "I love you," and would hug me. Not every day, but often enough that I remember it as a part of our relationship. I'm a father, and I tell my teenage boys I love them, and they say it to me unprompted, usually on a daily basis. Story 8. I have not ever heard my father say he loved me. But then again, I can count the amount of times I have seen my father on one hand, so I guess that wasn't enough time to hear it. Story 9. I absolutely hated my dad as a teen and couldn't wait to leave. I married at 19 and had a daughter at 21. My daughter was the one who cracked his shell. We ended up so close when he passed at 93. I considered it an honor to help him through hospice. He told me he loved me numerous times. I miss you, Dad. Story 10. I'm Asian Korean, so it wasn't part of his vocabulary. He did one time randomly ask if I wanted to buy any games for my Xbox 360 after he picked me up from school about 15 years ago. Story 11. I don't think my father has ever said, "I love you," to me or my sisters. My father is not very emotional, stoic, and has a bad temper. My eldest sister would label him as emotionally stunted, and I guess it's just the way he was raised and the culture we're in. I never doubt that he loves us, though, as he shows his love in acts of service. I remember him being a great father when my sisters and I were growing up, but he has made mistakes that unfortunately we're all paying for right now. So, I have this intense bitterness and resentment towards him, and it doesn't help that we don't see eye to eye anymore. Looking back, I do feel sad that I don't have the same relationship that I used to have with my father when I was younger, but his mistakes cost us so much that all I feel now is resentment. Story 12. No, I'm from Generation X. My boomer father was part of the John Wayne culture, former military raised by the Depression era, pull yourself up by the bootstraps generation. He never expressed any kind of emotion outside of rare displays of anger or sarcastic disapproval. He raised me, a 55-year-old female, to be stoic and hyper-independent, mostly through emotional neglect. It really did a number on my self-esteem as a girl. As an adult, I gravitated towards emotionally detached men. I didn't find love with a truly expressive, emotionally intelligent man until my 50s, and sometimes it's still awkward to learn to accept how loving he is, but it's wonderful. Story 13. Every week I see my family just about every Sunday, plus usually once or twice throughout the week, and I always get a hug, a kiss, and an "I love you." After all, I am Daddy's little girl. Story 14. Mine? No, not that I remember. Only after passing the bar exam do I remember him even saying he was proud of me for the first time. Actually, it might have been, "If your grandpa was alive to see this, he'd sure be proud." Heck, he even tried to talk me out of law school. Didn't think I had what it took. I think maybe he hated the idea I'd surpass him educationally. I learned how to be a great father by doing the opposite of most of what he did. I tell my daughter I love her all the time and that I'm proud of her. It's easy because it's true. Story 15. Never. When he had dementia, his caregiver told him to tell me he loved me, and he outright refused. Hugs? No way. He was always distant and cold. My mother told me once that she loved me right before she died. Story 16. My father never said he loved me. I kept hearing from other people he talked about how great I was all the time. Rarely praised me, not much that I remember. He grew frail after a stroke and walked feebly using a walker. He spent all his time sitting at the kitchen table, watching his little TV and looking at newspapers, car industry journals, and motorcycle magazines. Pop spent 10 years sitting at that table. Pop was 74 when I decided, for some reason, to love bomb him good, after I'd visited an hour or so while I had the chance. I told him I loved him while giving him a hug. Another rarity. Pop croaked out that he loved me too. I was on a business trip in North Carolina 3 days later when I got word he'd had a major heart attack. Of course, I bailed out of the trip to race home to see him, but he had been unconscious on life support the whole time after the heart attack. My mom and brothers stood around his bedside in the intensive care unit. After a few hours of saying goodbye, we pulled the plug. I feel very lucky I said what I did when I last saw him, not knowing it was my last chance to see him alive or ever speak to him. Years later, I still feel lucky and happy I told him I loved him while I still could. Story 17. Very often, when I could see him, I think he was the only one who loved me from his heart and deeply cared. He was very toxic and an addict, and such was his behavior. He hurt my mother and was abusive, and of course, he hurt the family mentally by his actions. Yet, I always felt safe when I was with him, and I was so weird seeing him hitting my mom and yet getting such good care. Well, of course, not everything was good, but he did his best to not let toxicity win over, and I think that's admirable. Even though he may have a heart of gold, his father hit him way too often for the stupidest things. My grandfather bent him this way. The sentence "trauma goes through 3 generations" is so applicable, I consider it to be true. I have my fair share of related behavior, and I hate it. That I don't have contact with him, though, not because of him either. I just don't feel like family anymore. Story 18. I am old now, and my dad passed away 30 years ago, and I cannot recall him ever saying he loved me. But I cannot recall other parents saying that either. Story 19. He randomly texted it to me while saying goodnight last year. He was on vacation and most likely drunk, but I still cherish the screenshot I took at the time. Story 20. My dad tells me he loves me every night when he leaves my house after having dinner. He lives up the road but comes almost every night for dinner, although we go to his house for dinner on Thursdays. I tell him I love him too. My parents were very affectionate, and we were always saying it and, more importantly, showing it. After my mom died, he started coming to dinner every night. I've been really lucky. Story 21. Because my father couldn't say, "I love you," he told me what he would do to people who would hurt me. He told me how he would protect me in case of an emergency. And because he was a chef, he told me which body parts he'd eat due to their tenderness. It sounds weird, I know, but it gave me that warm feeling that "I love you" gives me now. Papa, I love you. Story 22. He did, but he also abandoned us when we were young. Although he made some efforts later in life, he was never really a father. He remarried and raised his wife's children with her and was apparently a great father to them. They spoke about the wonderful things he did for them and with them at his wake, and my brothers and I sat there listening to these glowing reports of him. wondering why we were never given any of that. On the bright side, it taught me what not to do as a husband and father, and I have a great relationship with my wife and children. Breaking the cycle is a great victory. Story 23. If he ever did, it was only after yelling at me for an hour and in the context of, I do this because I love you. And no, I get that a lot of context is lost and many assumptions are made when I tell this story. Some people assume I must be being dramatic when I talk about how often my dad told me how lucky I was that he wasn't literally beating me to the point of bloody knuckles, and that I must be leaving something out to suggest he literally never said it outside of that context. But no, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Story 24. Once, when I was 19, the day I moved out, we never had a bad relationship or anything. He's just that kind of guy. My mom told me at least 2 to 3 times a day. Story 25. My dad had never said it, and I never remembered him ever hugging me or anything. But after my brother died, he started saying he loved me once in a while. Story 26. Nope, maybe when I was a baby he did. I assume so since I see it with my kids and my brother's kids, but once you're 5, he's over it. Trauma reaction, I'm sure. Edited to add, I'm female, by the way. I saw your comment about it being common for daughters to hear it, so you know I'm one of the ones that don't. Story 27. I remember as a teenage girl there was an instance where I was at first teasing but then begging my dad to say he loved me, but he refused to. I will never forget. Anytime he did manage to say or write the words in my adulthood just felt hollow and confusing. Story 28. When I was little, my dad would tell me he loves me, and I would say it back. The crushing part was him saying, no, you don't, all sad and hurt, then walking away. Now I struggle to say I love you to anyone, even though I want to. Story 29. In my house, we say love you, basically anytime somebody leaves the house. So even if he's just running down the street to the store, he says it. He told me once that it's because his dad never really said it when he was growing up, and he had an unexpected heart attack and died when my dad was like 20. So he always makes sure to say it. I've had friends that are shocked by how much we say it, but I don't know, it's just the way it is. Story 30. He would say it in passing in reference to my family, like, we love you guys, talk to you later. But I don't believe he ever said, I love you to me directly. However, he did tell me on multiple occasions that he was proud of me and would talk about my accomplishments to others, so I felt loved. He could have been more expressive about it when I was a kid, but I was also kind of a misanthrope and frequently in trouble, so I can see why it wasn't always top of mind for him. I never felt unloved, though. Story 31. Never. He chose not to be in my life, and even when I turned 18 and tried to reach out to him, he gave me major red flags, and I realized he is not a good person. Story 32. Oh, absolutely. My dad frequently says, I love you, but he's also ridiculed my appearance, called me stupid in public, kept a running tally of every mistake I've ever made, and told me at 18 that I was to get out of his house and never ask for anything again. It's a lot more than just saying, I love you. You have to make people feel loved. Story 33. Yeah, when the dirtbag is the loneliest. I get a text out of the blue saying he loves me. If he actually did, he wouldn't have to say it, just show up, man. Kills me looking at my kids, wondering how he just walked away. Story 34. My dad. Multiple times a day I am told that I am loved unconditionally. My biological dad. I just found out he has a criminal record. Also, he hasn't said anything remotely emotionally comforting in over 10 years. Story 35. I was lucky to have a loving and supportive mother and father. Dad told me he loved me all the time growing up, and even until recently. It was the last thing he said to me before cancer took him earlier this year. I tell my daughter I love her, am proud of her, and give her all the best dad hugs I can. Also, I strongly dislike cancer. Story 36. My father was very strict. His philosophy was basically, if he was working, you were working too. During summer vacations, I was often given lists of chores. I was required to take care of most things around the house, like cleaning, doing the dishes, and mopping the floors. I went out of my way to avoid adding to the mess, yet somehow my parents and brother made it worse. I didn't receive an allowance and had to ask or take small amounts of money here and there. On weeknights, if something needed to be done on the truck, We would be working until 9 or 10 p.m. I can dismantle a 350 cubic inch Chevrolet engine blindfolded. I've changed so many spark plugs and completed so many oil changes I could be a low-level mechanic. He didn't care about homework. You shouldn't have any, or if you do, get it done before I get home. I didn't have any real friends until I was 11, so I would hang out until about 4:30 p.m. My mom would get home by 4:45 p.m. and dad by 5 p.m. I had 30 minutes to rush to finish everything. For my 14th birthday, I went camping with my buddy. We came home a day early. We rode bikes back to the house because I wanted to get something and head back to my buddies. My dad was furious that I didn't call to let them know I was back home. I was grounded on the spot. I rode back to my friend's place, tearfully thanked his dad, gathered my things, and went home. Work smarter, not harder. Work hard. Play hard. Yeah, thanks, Dad. Why don't you teach that to my little brother? Oh, that's right. I'm the big brother, so I'm your workhorse. We didn't even live on a farm, but I'm sure I would have run it. Never once did I hear "I love you" or "I'm proud of you" from him. He died 9 years ago at 56 because he didn't want to be on dialysis. He left behind $100,000 worth of useless hobby debt. I miss him for the rare good things, but I often vent to my wife about how he treated us like workers. I am the complete opposite of him towards my wife and son.